Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you have just tuned in, I'm James Gomez. This evening, you're joining me in my masterclass entitled Understanding Racial Discrimination. I will try to give you an update of the kind of issues and discussions presently taking place in Singapore, and also putting it into the context of what's happening in the region as well. So just to help you and me along to keep focus on the discussion today, I will share my screen with you where I have prepared some PowerPoints that may be useful for you. So just bear with me as I try to share the screen for you. So there you go. Here we are with the screen, and that's where we are at. So today, my discussion will cover the following topics. I will look at the current discourse on racial discrimination in Singapore, put it in the context of the region in Southeast Asia, look at some of the laws, the policies, the rhetoric behind race and ethnicity, the non-legal measures being used. I will also introduce the International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination that Singapore signed a couple of years back, in 2017 to be precise, and submitted its first report late in 2018. And I think that's an interesting document to look at. And finally, the question of, who's responsible for it. Now, in terms of current discourse, if you just look at the media and social media, you will see a lot that's in the public domain. We have seen an instance of police investigating a man accused of using racial slur and kicking a 50-year-old woman. We've seen that even in a down market for rentals, you find racial bias still continues to rear its ugly head in terms of the types of tenants landlords want. We see that the discussion of Chinese privilege, nothing unique in Singapore. We have similar discussions also in other parts of Southeast Asia, including in Thailand. But we see that at the same time, minorities also seem to be facing institutional racism. And then we have also this debate about immigration and migration policies, and we have the CECA, where that has been in the public domain more recently with the Indian variant of the COVID-19 virus, and how the Facebook group was shut down and caused outrage among netizens. So these are some of the things that are happening here in the public domain. So moving on, let me just go to the next slide, if I can. Right. So in terms of the region, what we have here, and that's very interesting because we can certainly compare what's happening in Singapore in relation to the region. So let's look at our neighbor. And I'm just looking at the constitution because, there's a lot of ground to cover here today. So I'll just give you the top line. So in Malaysia, if you look at the constitution, you have the Bumiputra formation policies. You also have the role of the Sharia court to override the federal court in areas of personal and family law. So the key point here that I would like to make is that in many constitutions around the world and in the region in particular, the dominant group always finds some kind of special mention within the constitution. And from there, certain policies are formulated. So if we look at Myanmar, you will have a definition of key national races that are recognized. And here the challenge then with the Rohingya community is not recognized as a national race. Buddhism has a special status in the constitution, but there is no clear separation of religion and politics. Next, we look at the Philippines, predominantly a Catholic country. While the special position of Catholicism is not listed in the constitution, you will find that at least the tenets surrounding divorce and abortions are clearly articulated in the law. Something different is also the autonomous region of Bangsamoro in Muslim Mindanao. And then we'll come to Singapore. And Singapore, we have in the constitution the special status of the Malay, which now, largely is articulated, among other things, the tertiary tuition fee subsidy. I'll try to sort of unpack some of these things as I move along the session, and also the role of the Sharia court, where again it largely covers issues of marriage and inheritance. So next, I want to just highlight some of the laws that are in place in Singapore. If you look at the constitution, apart from what I mentioned, the special position of Malays, the constitution also articulates racial equality and non-discrimination as a key tenet. And then there are several other laws that are cited to manage racial discrimination and tensions, especially those that would cause ill feelings. So under the Sedition Act, speech or publication that promote ill feeling between different races or religion can result in a fine of up to 2,000 Singapore dollars and imprisonment of 18 months. So that's pretty steep right there in that act. Then we also have other instruments, legal instruments that are used, such as the Undesirable Publications Act. The Internal Security Act has been used. I think in recent years, we've seen some arrests and detention without trial around the notions of extremism. And then you also have the Presidential Council for Minority Rights. Its aim is to scrutinize bill by the Parliament to ensure they are non-discriminatory. I'm just giving you here the top line descriptions. We can go into a more critical discussion of these particular laws and other policies as I move further down. And last but not least, there's the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act. That's almost nearly 30 years old now. It has been revised again a few years to update it for the internet. And one of the features here is the Presidential Council. This is a different one from the minority rights. It's called the Presidential Council for Religious Harmony. And that's particularly to advise the Parliament or the minister in charge about measures taken to put people on notice, religious leaders, in relation to inciting ill feeling. Policies. Now, this is where it gets different. You have the law, then you have the policies. Now, I want to suggest here that unfortunately, when you formulate policies based on race, what it does is it accentuates racial consciousness. So that's a challenge I think we need to keep in mind. And as a result, it can result in policy blind spots that may give rise to division. So here, let's look at some of the key policies. They are not comprehensive, but these are the major ones that have often been discussed. So national service. I'm sure this has been in public domain that Malay Singaporeans were excluded from conscription in the early years and later not assigned to sensitive positions in the military. There are a lot of narratives and rhetoric around this, and they were largely assigned to police and civil defense roles. But if you look at contemporary language about this policy, then what you will hear is that as far as national service are concerned, positions and appointments are, of course, following keywords of meritocracy, but that the racial representation within national service is proportionate to the racial representation in the general population. So that's the kind of the official position out there. But it doesn't say what is the racial proportion in, let's say, civil defense or the police force. So we don't have enough, public statements there. Then you have the ethnic integration policy. If you live in a HDB flat, nearly 80% of Singaporeans do so, then, this is an important marker. Whether you buy, sell, you will need to consider the proportionality within the block and also within the estate. Then you have the special assistance plan. Traditionally, of course, it's been said to cater to the Mandarin-speaking community, with schools dedicated for that. But again, when you look at government discourse, you will see that options are available for Malay and Tamil speakers who want to take the higher form of mother tongue recognition. Then we go to the GRC system, where we have to take that together with the reserve presidency. It racializes politics, but again, the argument is really that it ensures minority representation in a sort of percentage terms. But again, is that tokenism? Let's discuss a little bit further. And last but not least, race on the ID card. There have been campaigns, there have been recommendations to remove race from the ID card and just to have it as Singaporean. This has been a long drawn, policy alternative that has been out there and articulated by many people. Again, having it there does accentuate racial differences and brings it into your, consciousness every day. Then is the rhetoric. While we have, the laws, while we have the policies, for integration, but you have rhetoric. Lee Kuan Yew has been known to have strong views about the role of the minority. He has never been called out or disowned for making those kinds of statements. We have several other incidents where members of the ruling party have also been caught out making remarks around race. And of course, the long-standing discussion that Singapore is not ready for a Chinese prime minister, especially among the older Singaporeans. And more recently, also that, siding with the minority community, if you are from opposition politics, then that's a no-no. So you have, people in government and from the ruling party who have been, caught out publicly for making those kinds of comments. The media is also fairly responsible in terms of running some insensitive advertisements, letters discriminating migrant workers and their living habits, and also racial stereotypes, portrayed through the newspaper. So I'm just checking in to see, we have a decent crowd that is watching this. So thank you very much for being here. If I may just pause for a cause and reach out and say, I'm trying to get 100 people onto my YouTube channel. So I've got about 70. I would be grateful if you just go onto my YouTube channel and subscribe. And if you are not already part of my Facebook page, please like and share the page as well. So moving along, apart from legal measures, policy measures, we have several other instruments that are used for managing racial discrimination and to build tolerance and so on. One of this is the Presidential Council on Minority Rights. We also have the National Steering Committee on Racial and Religious Harmony, and just down a little bit, one level around the grassroots, we have the interracial and religious confidence circles. We also have national education programs, celebrating Racial Harmony Day, civic education, and a lot of this work is also supported through the Ministry of Culture and Community and Youth. And they support several, government-linked and convened NGOs. What I want to say here is most of these are state-sponsored. In fact, all of them are state-sponsored, government-sponsored, funded. So you see the government's role quite heavy. I would even go as far as to say the different agencies are incestuous in their connectivity. And as a result, you will hear a singular speak. And I think that is the challenge in terms of thinking through about policies, improving them, because you can't be stagnant. You got to evolve. If Singapore has been in self-rule, since about 60 years, if we are still having this kind of problem, and the needle really hasn't moved, so what are the challenges, really? So here, I think I would like to introduce the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. I was in Singapore and in the thick of it 10 years ago, or now nearly 11 years ago, when we had the visit for the UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Forms of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. At that time, I was heading an NGO called Singaporeans for Democracy, and we made a submission to him. We also had a met with Mr. Muigai and had a chat. And thereafter, I also published an academic article, reviewing the visit. That article is available in my academia. You can also, access it. In fact, I assigned it as a pre-reading for this session. The fact that there's so much interest, I'll just give you a fun fact. That article was accessed 17,500 times. That's more than any academic publisher would be able to give a run on a piece like that. So it shows a lot of interest. And the key thing that I mentioned there in the piece, it's a very useful piece to get yourself acquainted with a slice of history of what happened in that few days and week when the visit happened. Because at the end of the day, you have an international UN person, who looked at all the policies and laws that I've discussed earlier and called them out to be problematic in several areas, things that most Singaporeans are quite aware of if you are active on these issues. But he said, in order to move forward, he said, we must be able to discuss this, right? And currently there are restrictions in Singapore in terms of being freely to discuss. So what is interesting here is the comeback. So the Singapore government's comeback was only they have the responsibility to decide on freedom of expression when it deals with matters of race and religion, because only they have the responsibility to deal with the fallout should anything go wrong, and they are the risk holders. and that the UN is not. So that kind of gives you a sense of the group speak in terms of who has the responsibility to move the discourse on racial discrimination, which sometimes evolves into hate speech. So does the state have the sole full responsibility for it? Which was one of the points that I made in the run-up to promoting this talk. Do you and I have a part also in terms of a shared responsibility for that? So we can take that up in a few minutes, but in the meantime, I would just move on to the document itself, which is the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, often known simply as ICED. So after his visit, as much as he was criticized, and he also raised the point that Singapore has not signed up on this, but of course it was tactical because it was one of the first visits to Singapore by the special rapporteur. The special rapporteur of any mandate can only come to any country at the invitation of the government. So obviously they were already thinking about signing up to the ICRD, and which they did in 2015, and then they ratified it in 2017 and submitted the first report in 2018. If you really wanted to get insight to the minds of those in power for the last 60 years or so in Singapore, it's imperative that you take some time and actually read the full report, because it's very, very enlightening. It gives you an insight to the speak and their thinking, right? And it also shows, what you're up to if you want to have a discussion around these issues. So I'll put these key observations here, and I do, have the report with me. I just, before today, I did reread all 42 pages. And the first thing that really struck me here was the opening, right? The foreword. By the end of the first sentence, it begins, by the time you read the first sentence, which is saying, we simply, I'll read it to you. At the announcement of Singapore's independence on 9th August 1965, our founding father, Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, said, we are going to be a multicultural nation in Singapore. And it goes on. So they bring back, the thinking right down to Lee Kuan Yew. And we know Lee Kuan Yew didn't hold very good views about the minority communities at times. And the party has never distanced themselves away from his comments. And then it goes on to talk about their thinking and philosophy. So there's a lot. It's 42 pages, and it's very informative reading to go through. I do want to give you a bit of a top line in case you don't have the time. I covered a lot of that ground through the initial slides when I talked about the law, the policies, and it doesn't talk about the rhetoric, of course, only all good things, right, in such government reports. So so what were the things that struck me? I think the key that struck me was the level of kind of one-sided view of things. And we can't expect a critical review of Singapore's racial and ethnic policies, because it has to come from outside, both in terms of, independence and legitimacy. You can't expect them, and I think a lot of you know better than me that they are not into, self-criticism, more about self-praise. But I'll just flick through the report, and I've made some notes to see where some of the things are problematic. So the People's Association is listed as an organization that promotes racial harmony and social cohesion, but yet politically we know it also promotes the ruling party. So those are kind of, very stark conversations, observations that you can make. There's a great overlap of organizations and institutions. There's a lot of intertwined relationship. I'll just give you an example. You have One People SG. Now, One People SG is an organization set up a few years to, I think it's 2007. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but just to give you an idea of how long or how recent it is. And it spends, if you look at its published accounts, it spends about, 2 million a year, right? It raises through, money from, as I said, the Ministry of MCCY, the self-help groups, PA, whether in cash or in kind, just looking at the most recent ones, up to 1 million. And then it also indicates two other income generation. One is through fundraising activities, and another one through, I think it also generates revenue to space rental and things like that. So it's just the internal money kind of moving around, yeah. So that gives you an idea of how state-centric this whole engineering of racial discussion, policies, and so on. All of it, around key ideas of promoting social cohesion, integration, and anchored on meritocracy. So, but it really requires much unpacking. Another thing to note here that may be of useful is it comes out more clearly in this report than other reports previously. For example, in the Universal Periodic Review, where it looks at, it mentions the presence of Inter-Ministry Committee on Human Rights. So I think we will probably want to know more about that. What this Inter-Ministry Committee of Human Rights, who's heading it, who's part of it, what it actually does, who does it consults, and how this whole report is formulated. There are a few things that overall the report struck me was essentially you have very limited legal remedy as far as racial discrimination or recourse is concerned. The report, of course, just points to it's a constitutional matter, so you can make a constitutional challenge. So that's one option. Then there are also penalties for kind of hate speech, that you can find in the penal code. But otherwise, you have to take, it's a civil suit, it's a civil action. So how much of it can you really manage, or what kind of recourse do you have? The approach that they have taken is really to mitigate. So for example, if there's an issue of a bias, a racially biased rental ad, then you can take it out to the Council of Estate Agents. If there are racial discrimination issues, language in schools, then students are sent for counseling. If there's discrimination in the workplace, then it's some kind of tripart arrangement discussion, right? So you really don't have a mechanism. If you look at the Presidential Council on Minority Rights, it's stacked with your own people. So it's not independent. And when the special rapporteur came, 10 years ago, he did recommend that, the council itself is not a bad idea, but just make it independent so that, it's not incestuously staffed. So I'm going to just slowly wrap this up in case you had some questions or opinions that you want to send through. I'm happy to respond to them if you're online. But that's broadly, in terms of a quick overview of the understanding, racial discrimination. There's only so much one can cover in about 30 minutes or so. And as I have tried to highlight to you, any discussion at any time, makes them prickly. So that's why there's a lot of concern about any discussion on race and religion. They always strung up about, causing ill feeling and, causing tensions and so on and so forth. Therefore, it steers people away from actually being able to, discuss the issue. So I think as a kind of a wrap up, the key question would be, whose responsibility is it? The state, under the PAP government continues to believe they are responsible in finding the balance between freedom of expression and discussions of race. But, with ever decreasing voter support, touching in the last election just below 60%, popular support that is, can they take 100% of the responsibility, right? So I think that's something to kind of think about. Therefore, other actors must continue to play a part in promoting racial harmony in Singapore, and not just the incestuous group. I think we need to go beyond the group speak to include other people, because if you don't share their values, you're not going to be on board. And if you have been in Singapore long enough and you have worked within the system, you know that every turn and corner, unless they don't know what values, in terms of political values and positions you are at, you will not get access to anything, right? Unless it's a fluke. So it's the group speak that keeps things together, and everybody is kept out. Everybody else is kept out. And those who are being kept out, it's getting larger. So I think something is not right, and that has to be fixed. Through social media, I think there has been a voice, and that has been coming out, and we can see clearly there. But then, laws have been put into place. This divisive rhetoric of, against people who speak up is something that we actively see. Finally, we need real NGOs, not gongos, government organized NGOs, and funded, to a right sum, incestuously, once again, I must add. I think we need more independent organizations, NGOs, who are not strictly overseen and supported by the government. This would allow for more active discussion on experiences of racial discrimination, and for the better understanding of the current situation. So I'm going to just pause here. It's my first FB Live, by the way. So I'm glad you caught it. But I hope to be able to do more, not necessarily on this topic alone, but I'm looking at other topics, and also not just on Singapore, but around the region. So this is very much a kind of a trial period to just see, how to get the hang of it. So once again, my name is James Gomez. I'm a political scientist. I'm interested in issues of technology and how they affect, political participation and governance. I've recently, put most of my personal social media handles together under James Gomez SG. I have a website which is called James Gomez SG, and you can see it right at the bottom. I'm also newly on Clubhouse. I'm also on, Instagram and Twitter. But most importantly, I would be grateful if you could, subscribe to my YouTube channel. As I said earlier, I have about 70 people there. And okay, so I have a question. Thank you very much. That'll keep me going for a bit. Can you talk about constitutional rights that we citizens to know? Okay. Essentially, I mean, in the Constitution, it states that, it promotes racial equality and it's not supportive of discrimination, if I can, put it simply. But what I was trying to say throughout this discussion was, you do not have a legal mechanism from which to draw down rights, right? So you don't have a complaints bureau where you can go and say, look, hey, you are an independent entity, equal to all. This is how I feel with regards to a particular issue. It could be something simple as discrimination at the workplace, and you instead of a civil action, you go to this. In some countries they have equity commissions. You to go to this body, and often there's a process. They will start with mediation, then of course you take it to the courts or the council or whatever legal form they have. Or it could be something more substantial, like racial discrimination to access to, let's say, for rental. Racial discrimination in the Constitution is also limited in area. So, for example, the public service cannot discriminate, right? But it doesn't say the private sector cannot discriminate. So that's the hidden. So you don't have legal recourse in terms of, apart from civil litigation. So what you have now is the offending employer, their only punishment is that their access to work passes will be limited. So if you look at the report that I mentioned, the ICRD report, they have two examples where they punish two companies, one 3-month suspension of not being able to get work passes, and then another one for 6 months. So I think that's not good enough. I think you need a more robust legal framework where you can claim your rights. Now, and this is where the Council of Minority Rights can be an independent body, and recommendations have been made by the Special Rapporteur almost 10 years ago that that is one option. Another option would be, of course, for Singapore to have a National Human Rights Commission where you can look at these and other rights issues as well. So in short, I think you don't have, apart from those things that I've said, and those things that I've said in the public domain and articulated by the government themselves, but we fall short of an independent legal recourse. So I think that's it really for me once again. So thank you very much for watching. It was nice to have you here. I will not go away yet. I will just play you some of my favorite chill music. And great to have you here once again. It was nice to see all of you, and and keep in touch.